Hello and welcome to the Fox Nation special Trump on Trial Live. I'm your host, Greg Jarrett. Thanks for being with us. Well, it was certainly a dramatic day in court. Stormy Daniels once again took the stand and today facing a rather heated cross-examination from Trump's legal team. Former president is expected to exit the courtroom any moment now, and we'll take you live if he decides to speak. Joining me now is veteran criminal defense attorney Brian Claypool. And, I want to get all your sort of initial reaction of what I thought was an absolutely withering cross-examination by Trump's defense attorney, Susan Necheles, who really just demolished, I think, Brian, the credibility of a witness who wasn't even relevant and didn't need to be called by the prosecution.
Yeah, hey, Greg, great to be back with you. You're exactly right. The prosecution should have never called Stormy Daniels. She's not relevant to the case. When the jury gets a verdict form, there's no question on the verdict that says, did former President Trump have an affair with Stormy Daniels? That's not an issue in the case. So what happened? They called her. It was an atomic bomb that blew up against the prosecution. Why? For three reasons. The cross-examination of Trump's lawyers was phenomenal for three reasons. First, it showed Stormy Daniels had bias, right? Remember, Greg, she actually said, I hate former President Trump. In my entire career, I have never had a witness say they hate the defendant. So that proves bias. And then she proved financial incentive. What do I mean by that? Well, Stormy Daniels got $800,000 for a book advance, another alleged 130 from former President Trump, and another 125 from NBC. The third thing that was proved effectively on cross-exam of Stormy Daniels was prior inconsistent statements. The female lawyer did a great job. And you know what the downfall is here, Greg? Social media, right? Stormy Daniels tweeting things. Remember that thing about the orange turd being flushed? I mean, that's her tweet put in front of her, and then other prior inconsistent statements. So it was absolutely devastating for the prosecution and Stormy Daniels.
Brian, I'll take just a slight issue with what Ken said. I argue she's utterly irrelevant and an unnecessary witness because her lawyer already took the witness stand and he acknowledged their whole shakedown scheme to get money from Trump. He went through all the payments and so on and so forth. So, Brian, I have to think that prosecutors were sitting there and muttering to themselves, why in the world did we decide to call her to the witness stand? They didn't need to. And I think they gained maybe a little with this sordid story, but they lost a lot on cross-examination.
Yeah, Greg, I'll go one step further on why her testimony was categorically irrelevant. Remember, right at the end of the cross-examination, Trump's lawyer did a phenomenal job of waiting till the end to ask Stormy Daniels the following. She says, hey, are you familiar with the indictment? Right? Remember that? Do you know what the indictment's about involving former President Trump? He's like, oh, why would I know? Hey, do you know anything at all about the financial records of former President Trump? And she's like, no, why would I know anything about that? That was absolutely brilliant. And the timing of that was perfect. Why? Because that's the last thing the jury hears from Stormy Daniels on cross-examination. It was powerful. And look, at the end of the day, let's call it what it was. I thought I was watching the Playboy channel today instead of a criminal trial in a New York courtroom. That's all this was about.
Yeah,
hey Greg,
so our viewers understand the First Amendment not only protects the speaker, it protects the listeners, the American public during a presidential election. Go ahead, Brian, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I just want to jump in on this gag order. I had a high-profile case in Palm Beach, Florida, involving Dalia Dippolito a few years ago, and I had the state court judge in there issue a gag order against me, but that was before jury selection, right? He didn't want me out there saying things about the case, what I thought about it before jurors were selected, right? And really, that's the point. That's the thrust of a good gag order. I didn't agree with me being subjected to it, but look, the purpose of a gag order is to stop potential jurors from being contaminated with comments in the media. Here, we have a sitting jury, right? So anything that President Trump is going to say about the case, in my opinion, is not going to impact a juror. And one other point I wanted to make in this case about a witness a couple of days ago. I think one of Trump's best defenses in this case now is that the checks that he allegedly signed in 2017 and the financial entries, they were in 2017. That's after the election.
Yeah.
That's after he was elected. So how can the prosecution argue that anything that he allegedly did interfered with an election when those acts took place after the election took place?
The other theme, in addition to Stormy Daniels' hatred of Trump, was her abiding greed. We heard it from her attorney, but we heard it from the lips of the defense attorney, Susan Necheles, today when she was recounting all the attempts, Brian, that Stormy Daniels made to try to profit from her fleeting relationship with Donald Trump. Is that something that would resonate with the jury as, we can't believe this witness, her credibility is shot. She not only hates the accused, but she was trying to blackmail him.
Yeah, Greg, it's entirely relevant. Why? Because if I was giving closing argument for Trump, during my closing, I would pull up a jury instruction. Every county across this country has the same one. It talks about how do you assess the credibility of a witness. And in that jury instruction, it talks about what you're talking about. Do they have a financial motive? Is there any bias, right? I'd read that jury instruction to the jury and say, this is the law you've got to abide by. Here's what you need to look at to assess Stormy Daniels. And by the way, look at over $1 million she made from what happened, what she alleges took place between her and President Trump. And go one step further. That jury instruction talks about the motive again. She laughed, Greg. She laughed when they were talking about the indictment, whether she had anything to do with it. And that to me was just devastating. And I would raise that as well in closing argument to show that she has zero impact on whether former President Trump should be convicted.
You know, Brian, one of the things that I still don't get, and I've never heard an explanation that's satisfactory from anyone, is how a local prosecutor can usurp the authority of federal prosecutors by bringing a case in which he says the underlying crime is a violation of federal elections law in a federal election. Hasn't he commandeered authority that the law doesn't permit him to enforce?
Greg, great point. And I would argue the supremacy clause, right? Federal law overrides state law here, right? That's another argument you can make. But there's no federal law involved here at all. And if you're in a state court, that second alleged crime has to arguably be a state crime. Let's face it. Their argument, now we've seen it, it dovetails a federal election. In other words, they're using a state law, right, to get that second alleged crime in, but really it pertains to a federal election. And I think this case should have been tossed out of the court before it even started. And Greg, let's hope that, former President Trump's lawyers, I hope, in these motions for mistrials, and hopefully they'll file a motion to dismiss all charges after the prosecution rests. I hope they raise that argument as well that you just made, in addition to all of this salacious testimony by Stormy Daniels that has zero probative value and a mountain of prejudicial effect on former President Trump.
We've got 1 minute left. Brian Claypool, I'll let you have the final word on that.
Yeah, I remember about 15 minutes ago, Greg, I talked about social media, right? And how that can affect this case and will. It did with Stormy Daniels, but we're not even talking about social media with Cohen. We're talking about the plethora of interviews that this guy has given to all these other networks, right? The books he's written about how much he despises former President Trump. That will be front and center in the cross-examine. If I'm Trump's lawyer, I'm going through every single one of those. You said that about him. You said that about him. boom, boom, boom. We can't believe a single word out of your mouth. And then finish with, you're a convicted felon, and you've committed perjury. That's your case. That's your cross-exam.
You know, he has raised his right hand and sworn to tell the truth before so many congressional committees, and then he lied and went to prison for it. In so many court cases, and you know, he lied. Recently, a federal judge said, "You're lying again, and you're a serial perjurer." I mean, you would have to be a moron to rest your entire case on a guy like Michael Cohen. But, you know, maybe that description nicely fits Alvin Bragg. Brian Claypool, and thank you all for watching this Fox Nation special.